What's up YouTube, Pirate King Codex here. Recently we just had another 1,000 player tournament for the Fukuoka qualifiers. I have the top 2 decks here. I'm really excited to talk about these because green is my favorite color and I'm excited to see some green representation. It's been looking like Zoro has been dominating the set 2 meta, so it's nice to see that Zoro has been taken down. So I wanted to discuss these 2 decks. But let's start out with the second place deck first. We have Kinemon as the leader. So for Kinemon, standard 5,000 attack, 5 life. During your main phase once per turn, when you have 1 or less characters in play, reduce the play cost of the next 3 or higher Wano Country type character card you play from your hand by 1 during this turn. So this deck has a lot of targets, so just giving a quick look here. So we have Izo. You can play Izo for 2. You can play Raizo for 2. You can play Okiku for 2. Yamato you can play for 3. And then we have Kazuki Odin, which you can play for 7. I'll go over these cards in just a moment, but let's start out with the 1-drops. So we have your typical searchers. This deck does run both Momonosuke and Jewelry Bonnie. So Momonosuke lets you play it for 1. No attack, but you can activate during your main phase for 1 Dawn. You may rest this character to look at the top 5 cards of your deck. Reveal 1 Wano-type character card and add it to your hand. Then place the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order. So standard searcher, but this lets you grab your Wano-type cards. And then we have Capone Beige, who is a Supernova, not Wano-type, but standard 1-cost blocker. So you definitely want your cheap blockers, so this is a good 4 of here. Then we also have a 4 of for Jewelry Bonnie, like the Momonosuke. During your main phase, you can pay 1 and rest this character to look at the top 5 cards of your deck. You can reveal 1 Supernova type card and add it to your hand. Place remaining cards at the bottom of the deck in any order. So this deck has 2 searchers with Momonosuke and Bonnie, so you can really find the cards that you need. Sometimes it can be tricky to find the right type card that you're looking for, so sometimes you do get rid of your key cards, but having both searchers does make it easier to find those cards that you do need. So if you didn't use these cards, then you're just relying on the draw as normal to find them. This deck also runs the 2-drop killer, which is also a blocker. And then if you have a Dawn attached to it when it blocks, if you control 3 or more characters, draw a card. So this is a relevant ability sometimes, not always. But this will help you get cards if you can commit the Dawn to it. That's not always easy, but if you can, then you can get some card advantage that way as well. But either way, it's a blocker, so that's always good to have. We have Scratchman the Pooh. Just to note here, it's a 2k counter. Doesn't really get played too much, but Dawn times 1 when attacking, rest 1 of your opponent's Dawn cards. Not really relevant for the ability. This is here just to be a 2k counter. Izo is another 2k counter. As mentioned earlier, this is a Wano type card, and this does synergize with the Kinemon ability. On play, rest up to 1 of your opponent's characters with cost 4 or less. So this is an ability that is useful to have. So in addition to being a 2k, it is a good ability. This deck does not run Cat Viper, so that's also important to note. So if you are going to be going for that type of effect, you do have to rely on the Izo. But that's where the law can come into hand here, which I'll go over in a minute. We have Raizo, which is another Wano type card that synergizes with Kinemon. When attacking, once per turn, if you have 2 more arrested characters, draw 1. It's important to note that Raizo counts himself. So if you have another character that's already rested, so if you did use your Bonnie or your Momonosuke, or if you had an attacker, you can also attack with Raizo, and then you'll get this effect to draw a card. This does run 4 of it, so this is a heavy Raizo count. A lot of decks will run the Raizos, but with the Wano type cards, it's definitely a good one to have in this deck. Again, it synergizes with the Kinemon, so you can play it for only 2 if you have 1 or less characters in play already. With Raizo, you do want to have more than 1 character in play, but this is good to help you get there. Okiku does not have a counter, but this is a 4 of and a very powerful card if you can get it to stick. It is a Wano type character card. Dawn times 1 when attacking once per turn. rest one of your opponent's characters with a cost 5 or less. So this is really great for trying to target down blockers, or if your opponent has a decent sized attacker. So 5 or less is a pretty big range. It doesn't target the bigger cards, but this will get you through the blockers, or for example, if you have Trafalgar Law as a blocker on the opponent's side, Drake just from the green here, then you also have Queen for purple. There's a lot of targets for Okiku. The problem is Okiku is subject to Jet Pistol, so it is an easy target for your opponent to get rid of. So you have to be careful when playing the Okiku. So if you are committing the Don for it, just keep that in mind. This is the first card that is from set 2 besides the leader. So this is the new version of Yamato. It's a 4-drop for 6,000 attack. This card is also treated as Kazuki Odin. Doesn't really come into play for this deck, but on play, press up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 6 or less. So same ability as Izo, but it does target characters that are 6 or less. So it does give you a bigger range. So this will also help you hit some of those bigger cards like King for purple. But this card is seeing a lot of play, and this is a 4-of in this deck. This deck only runs 1 copy of Trafalgar Law. On play, you may return one of your characters to your hand. Play 1 cost 3 or lower card from your hand. So this will help you recycle cards. If you use up the Momonosuke or Bonnie, you can reuse them. You can reuse your on-play effects with Izo or Yamato, or if you were running the Cat Viper, you can also use Cat Viper. So this will help you recycle the on-play effects, but this one is only a 1-of in this deck. This deck has a heavy count of Diaz Drake, so this one is 6,000 attack, but on play you KO one of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 4 or less. So this will synergize well with Izo, Okiku, or Yamato, or if you're even playing Cat Viper, that would apply here as well, so you can combo with this, and you can KO one of your opponent's rested characters. This is a good way to clear them out and get a body on the board as well. And also a heavy count of the Useless Captain Kid blocker. So this one also has the ability, if you have Don ×1 attached to it, at the end of your turn you set this card as active. So this is really effective for having a big body to attack with. So with the Don attached to it, you'll be attacking for 8,000, but then you can untap it, or you can unrest it. At the end of your turn, you set it as active, and now you have a blocker on the field as well. So this will give you the best of both worlds, and this will help keep a big blocker on the field. So this one's a little bit harder to get through than some of your cheaper blockers, like your 1-drops. And one of the stars of the deck is the new Odin card. During your main phase, once per turn, you pay 3 Don, switch this card to active. On KO, play up to 1 Wano country type character card with the cost of 3 from your deck, then shuffle your deck. So this one has the Leader Kid's ability built into it. We all know how effective that is, but this also has an 8k body behind it. So that's super effective. This is definitely going to be one of your game closers here. It does only run 2 of, so they don't want to get flooded with it, but when you do want it at the end of the game, it's going to help you close out those games. If your opponent does manage to KO it, you can grab one of the 3-cost cards from the deck. So you have plenty of targets here. Again, you have your Izo, you have your Raizo, you have Okiku. So you have a lot of options with that. So this will be a good way to also get a body on the field. It's important to note that if your opponent KOs it on their turn, you'll have that character to attack with at the start of your turn. And lastly, we have the 3 copies of Paradise Waterfall. It's a counter event card. Your leader or one of your characters gain plus 2,000 power during this battle, then set one of your characters as active. So this is also going to be helpful for keeping you alive a little bit longer. It's a 2k counter, which is good. But then you also get to set one of your characters as active. So if you're trying to protect one of your characters, so if you attacked with your Odin, you can untap it so that way your opponent can't attack any longer. If you attacked with your Okiku, you want to try to protect your Okiku. So this is the deck that came in second place. But what about the deck that came in first place? Well, I'm happy to say my favorite leader, Captain Kid, made first place in this tournament. So, like I was saying, it seemed that Zoro was dominating. From previous events, we've seen good showings from red and purple, but this time we get to see green have a time to shine. It's also important to note here that the only card that is new from set 2 is the 4-cost Yamato. So a lot of the same cards we just saw, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on this one. But for Captain Kid, like we just mentioned with Odin, once per turn during your main phase, you can rest 3 Dawn. You may trash a card from your hand, switch this leader to active. So this will be one of your ways of closing out games. You'll stack as much Dawn as you can, leave 3 Dawn open, and then you attack with your leader. Then you can pay 3, discard a card, and do it again. So if your opponent's down to 1 life, this is a great way to close out games. If your opponent doesn't have any blockers on the field, or if you have a way to clear them out or rest them, then you can use this card to swing in, and it's going to be hard for your opponent to be able to counter such a big attack that way. And it's going to be harder to block it twice. So this is a really strong leader, and it has some good cards to go around it. So like the Kinemon, you have 4 of each of your searchers, so that way you can grab the cards that you need. This deck also does run a good balance of both Supernovas and Wano type cards, so it's going to be useful to have both searchers in this deck. Again, 4 copies of Killer, so we're seeing that trend there. This one has 4 copies of the Cat Viper, so this one is a 2-cost card. On play, rest one of your opponent's characters that cost 3 or less. So this is going to be a good way to tap down those cheap blockers. So if your opponent is trying to stop you with cheap blockers, 1 or 2-cost blockers, this will help you get through those. Again, 4 copies of Apu, 4 copies of Izo. This one runs 2 copies of Shachi. This one runs Shachi over Penguin. Penguin has a lower attack, so if you're going to play one of the 3-cost blockers, this is the one to go with. So it's a little bit bigger than the 1 or 2-cost blockers. So we see components of 1,000, Killer is 2,000. This one is 4,000. It does have the ability on play, if you don't control Penguin, play 1 Penguin from your hand. This deck does not run Penguin, so that is not going to come into play. But this is just being played for another blocker, just as a 2-of. This deck also runs 4 copies of the Raizo, again, just trying to get the card advantage. So if you're able to draw those cards, you'll be able to keep your cards alive better with the counters. Now, this is an interesting choice with the 5-cost secret rare Yamato. This is a card that I tried testing and tried to make it work very hard with my initial testing with set 1, but it just felt like it was better in theory than in practice. A lot of times your opponent will play around it, they'll be able to block it, or they'll just counter it and avoid taking the 2 damage from the double attack. But this card does also have Banish. So if you do manage to land that hit, your opponent is taking 2 life cards and they'll get trashed immediately, and they don't get to trigger. So one of the downsides of double attack normally is when you hit your opponent's life, they will get 2 cards in their hand. Some attack that might have normally gotten through will now be countered because they might have cards in hand to do so. So you have to be careful with the double attack. So this is where that Banish will come into effect. And if it does hit, then it's a really effective card. So you really have to play around your opponent and try to get this card to land. This is good towards the middle to late of the game. But it's also important to note, if your opponent has only 1 life card, this is not going to finish off your opponent. So it's not really going to do much more than a normal card. It's going to be just a 5-cost 5k attacker. So it's not going to be that much different than most other cards. It's just an expensive 5k. But if you do get it to land where you do make your opponent take 2 life cards of damage, that is important to note. Again, that Banish is also effective, so even if you do take that 1 life card, at least it won't trigger an ability and they can't use it as a counter. Again, 2 copies of the 4-cost Yamato. Same deal as the Cat Viper and the Izo. This has a heavy count of the blocker law for a count of 4. So again, there's a lot of on-play effects here, so you can recycle those. You can even pick them up, use them again to target something else, or you can pick it up and play a different one. We can pick it up and recycle your Ezo, so that way you can reuse it as a 2K counter after using the effect. Or if you need to pick up a card, you can also put down one of your blockers. Either way, you have plenty of targets with this deck. And one of the other stars of the deck, this card was pretty meta defining for set 1, so this was a card you definitely had to be prepared for. If you weren't prepared for it, it'll catch you off guard. But I think a lot of people were kind of finding ways around it. But this is still one of the most important cards in the game so far. The 8-cost Kid, 8,000 attack. It has the effect Don ×1 during your opponent's turn. As long as this character is rested, your opponent cannot attack anything other than characters named Useless Captain Kid. It's important to note that if you have other characters named Useless Captain Kid, so you have the Promo Kid or the 7-cost Kid, those are still valid targets if they're rested. So any characters that are named Useless Captain Kid can still be attacked, but the main thing is you can't attack the leader. So if this card is rested with one Don attached to it, your opponent has to attack this card before they can attack anything else. If they cannot get through this card, then they are basically going to be stalled, and they're going to be stuck until they can take care of this card. During the main phase, once per turn, you may rest this character. You may play up to one character that costs 3 or less from your hand. So again, there's plenty of targets in this deck. You can play some of your cheap blockers like Capone, Killer, Shachi, or you can play something to rest one of your opponent's blockers using Ezo or a Cat Viper. But then this card can be rested on the turns being played if you use this ability. If you attach to Don, then this effect is online right away. But it's also important to note that if you do that, you want to make sure that you're able to protect the kid. Otherwise, if you just play it down and your opponent just takes it out in one hit, it's not really doing too much. You want this to stay around as long as possible. So make sure when you're playing it, you have ways to keep it alive. And lastly, we have Punk Gibson. This is the only event counter being played in the deck. For 2, your leader or up to one of your characters gains 4,000 power for the duration of the battle. Then rest one of your opponent's characters that costs 4 or less. It also has a trigger, rest one of your opponent's characters. So this is a really effective card. This will allow you to counter one of your opponent's attacks, and then if they have those cheap blockers on the field, or if they have a cheap attacker, you can then rest that character so you can live to see another day. You can prevent your opponent from performing additional attacks, or you can prepare for your next turn so that we can get those blockers out of the way, so you can clear the way for your attacks to get through. And then with the trigger, this is also relevant because you are playing it at 4 of. So if you do get this in your life and on trigger, you can just immediately rest one of your opponent's characters. It doesn't matter if they are 4 or less. You can then rest one of your opponent's characters regardless of the cost, so you can get rid of their bigger threats. So this can also throw them off guard. So if they were trying to save one of their bigger attackers for the end, then you can disrupt their plans this way. So that about covers both of these decks. You can see that they had a lot of overlap. So you can see where green has its power, but they also had their own takes on green. So it was really interesting to see how they worked around it. And I think we'll see a lot more of green in the future. Both Kinemon and Kid are both really strong leaders. Going into set 2, I expected Kid to fall off a little bit, but it looks like it's still here to stay. And even without adding too many new tools here, what we had in set 1 is still really effective. I was able to win this 1,000 player tournament, so that says a lot. But I'm really excited to see where this goes from here. I am going to try to keep focusing on set 1 for now, but I did want to go over these decks because I was really excited to see green having such a strong presence in this large tournament. And as a green player, I want to improve myself, so this is really an inspiration for me. That's going to be it for this time, but be sure to leave a comment in the section below. Let me know what decks you were excited for set 2 and what you think of the meta right now. Be sure to bring along all of your hopes and dreams, and I'll see you in the next video.